And Mr. Lee, I was just wondering if you can let us know what your vision plans are for healthcare, specifically for the hospital. Would you be pursuing the construction of a new medical facility? And what is your opinion and your plans for the very controversial counterpart policy?
You know, at this stage, it's still early to really come with definitive plans. I think that it would be unfair to the different departments to not speak to all of them first. But for example, regarding the hospital, you know, I'm really trying to understand the build-up for the case for the hospital. In other words, what research has been done to determine what are the number one cases that people are being referred abroad. So what's the business case for the new hospital? So I'm really starting from basics, trying to make sure that I understand that the proper foundation's been laid for the construction of a new hospital and what that should be.
And the counterpart policy?
Again, I'm in the process of discussing it. I had a meeting this morning with the Department of Labor. There's been a number of variations in it, and as a matter of fact, at this stage, they're still not quite ready to show me where they are with it. So it's still, again, premature to talk about it.
Thank you, everyone, and I didn't mention it earlier, but congratulations on your appointment.
Thank you very much for your question, Judy. Mr. Hilbert Haar, you have the floor.
Okay, so the counterpart policy, we're not going to get a clear answer this morning, I get it. Then my question to the Prime Minister is, how long do you expect the process to take to complete electoral reform and to be ready for elections?
At this point in time, I cannot say. The thing is, it is not the government who would, for instance, write one or two proposals and say they're implemented. Once they require changes to the electoral laws, once you're changing ordinances, it has to go through the Council of Advice, it has to go through Parliament, and we know by experience that these things take some time. But I believe in order to have transparent electoral reform, we need to have a public discussion with, let's say, the stakeholders, with society. We've had, for instance, yesterday or the day before, Mr. Julio Romney was in Parliament. Yeah. One of the things that I have, and I'm not, God where this is concerned, but people stay, if you want to call it, from the outside, and then think up these things without knowing really, A, how it works on the inside, and two, without bearing in mind the Constitution. One of the, if you want to call it a conflict you may have, is the electoral system, and now with the electoral laws and with the electoral council, the focus is, prior to election, heavily focused on the party. In order to take part, you got to have a party, you got to register the party has to be an association, the party has to be this, it must have membership, how do you become a member, how do you go through postulation, dues, the organization of the political party is required than the organization of a multi-million-dollar business running the airport or the harbor, for instance. The minute the election is over, the party is dropped on the wayside, and the focus is on the 1, 2, 3, or 4 members who are elected. Not even collectively as a faction, but the Constitution only recognizes them individually as members who have been elected. That is one of, if you want to call it, a problem or a contradiction that you have. Then now you move on to the ship jumping, let's say. What are the proposals that you hear? And Julio Romney's proposal is one of them. It's like, no, if they want to jump ship, go ahead, but leave the seat. Now, I mean, a guy got to be a rocket scientist to decide, hey, I'm jumping ship, guys, but I'm leaving my seat. And then when he jumps overboard, he has no seat to hold on to float, and he's going to sink. So basically, then tell people, if you're no longer in agreement with the direction your party is going, resign from the party, and sit it out until the next election, whether you join a new party or you start with your own. What will that do to the individual who is no longer in agreement with his party? So picture yourself a scenario where we have this government, we have agreed in the parties or in the coalition, no ship jumping, boys, no ship jumping, girls, behave yourself. This government goes to Parliament in the next week or two to present, let's say, amendments to the budget 2015. And 2 members of Parliament supporting the government who are not in agreement with the budget. Against, they have not left their faction, they didn't jump ship, but they stay there. Against, government doesn't have a majority to pass its budget. We come with legislation to amend something. Against, the minister comes with a proposal for the hospital. Against, the Minister of Education comes with a proposal. Against, hey, we ain't jump ship, we close the ship jumping. They're not jumping ship. But where is the government? The government is overboard. So one of the things that I personally have always addressed is the issue of the electoral change, the system to the, we call it, for a quick reference, the Lynch Law. Former late Island Councilman and Commissioner Edgar Lynch was a member of our faction at the time and a commissioner. And yes, I always opposed it. I was not in favor of it, but a team player, I was the leader, but the majority said that's the direction they want to go in. But I've always, everybody in the Island Council knew that. And even for the transition to 1010, in here, as Commissioner of Constitutional Affairs, I can remember telling the leaders then in a meeting, I said, Sarah, I think Rosita was one of them, this is an opportunity to make the change. But of course, the people who were in the Island Council at the time, and those who are in Parliament now, they are there because of that change that we have had. But what it does, it destroys the fabric of parties, because a person, and we have seen several persons, and some of them are elected in Parliament today, and the first thing they say, you see I was right, because the focus is not on the party, the focus is on the individual. If what was the biggest, if you want to call it political sin, the Alliance committed, they were coming out of the elections of 2010, by far the strongest party. Of the top 10 vote getters, 8 of them came from the National Alliance. Now Minister of Education, Sylvia Jacobs, was the number 8 in votes on our list at that time. Did not make it to Parliament. But in the top 10, she was among the top 10. If Sylvia Jacobs was with her votes on the UP list, she would have been elected in 2010. There are others who were not elected. If they were on the UP list in 2010, they would have been elected. So what did the UP do, for instance? Lure them to greener pastures. Guys, you can't get elected there. And there are others who left and went to other parties because I stand a chance to get elected there. And tomorrow, if a new party starts and you shop around by existing parties and you find enough people who want to get in Parliament, they're going to tell you, hey, with my 200 votes, I won't make it on the list of the National Alliance, and maybe not on the list of the UP either, because they will only get 2 seats anyway. So I ain't gonna make it there. So I gotta shop around and like, hey, that's a new party. And if they offer me number 2 with 200 or 150 votes, I'm in. If I go National Alliance with 400 or 500 votes, I won't be in. So if you make that change, for instance, and one can argue, and I'm sure that would be the next question, so why not make that change now and go to elections? That is not the only thing. Secondly, you need to convince the members in Parliament You need to get a majority there, and it is those people, the people who are there, they have benefited from that, so they may not want to make that change. But there is, if you have public discussions and public fora where people voice their opinion more and more, and let's say put pressure then on their political parties or their political leaders or their representatives in parliament to, for instance, make that change. Then we have issues as Article 33 in the Constitution. What does it say? If a minister or ministers get a vote of no confidence, they have to resign. What are all the constitutional experts who have been asked to render an opinion say? All of them have said immediately. But what does the minister do? Yeah, but the Constitution didn't say when, so they took a month. Does that stop a new minister from taking 3 months or a year? And so we can go down the line. The Constitution has said, it did not say it is a must, but the Constitution created a possibility to regulate, like you would call it, bylaws, have a national ordinance to regulate 1, 2, or 3 other areas. So rather than rushing into an election now, we are saying, let us fix all of these things. There are issues in the electoral laws that need to be addressed, but there are issues also with the time span. The electoral laws say prior to an election, the Electoral Council has to do 1, 2, 3, but if you dissolve Parliament, you don't have enough time, let's say, to carry out some of these activities. If a new party registers, let's say, a week before the election or the deadline with the Electoral Council, and the Electoral Council says, I'm giving you 1 week to fix it. But the constitution of that party says to convene a general meeting in order to make changes to the Constitution, you require 2 weeks, while the Electoral Council only gave them 1 week to fix their problem. Then you have conflicts there as well. So there are a number of issues that affect campaign financing, etc., that need to fix. So I can't tell you now it will be 6 weeks, 6 months, or a year, but what the government is saying in the change to the national decree, as soon as electoral reform is completed, we will then hold the election.
To place there like something like 40 kids with behavioral problems and turn them off in 6 months into good kids and send them back to their schools. Are you going to go through with that plan?
Thank you for the question. That's actually one of the main things that I was updated on because the advice was still hanging. Mm-hmm. Had some issues. I've been informed about it. Actually, the Educational Care Center was one of my babies back in 2012, and a committee was established since then to create a program to assist with the then rising numbers of children who were being suspended or teachers who were unable to deal with the behaviors that they were entertaining. I see some of my original plan still there. However, not all of it, let's say. So in the interest of securing the funding for the program, because I do believe that the objective of the program is a good one, that I will progress as is, but I will add the challenges that I see with what is presently there that I miss from the original concept. So I still have to go through a discussion with the stakeholders who were busy preparing it. But in order to secure the funds, if at this time, because of the time of the year and the budget, this program was slated to start in October and has not started. So the document went backward and forward, and the funding was secured basically when we had that amendment in Parliament, or that discussion, that motion, that interesting motion back in January of 2015. But in any case, the funding for the startup of it was secured, and if we do not commit those funds before the end of the year, as well as for 2016, because apparently in some of the budget cuts that were made since October or whenever in the past few weeks or months, it touched on the continuity of this program. So that would be very difficult to start a program that meets a need, that has a very high investment, and then be unable to continue with it in 2016. So we're busy at this time, together with the SG and all the other stakeholders, to find the best way forward in collaboration with the Finance Department and the Finance Ministry.
Okay, thank you.
So it does have my priority, but of course, I will assess the aspects of the program that I think need to be upgraded. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you, Hilbert, for your questions. Alita, good morning. You have the floor.
Good morning, Cedric. Thank you. Welcome, and Prime Minister Marlin, Prime Minister Jacobs, and Minister Lee. Yeah, looking ahead, we need a woman Prime Minister again, right?
In the making.
In the making, of course. On the decree, Prime Minister Marlin, what exactly is the date you're looking at to be able to get that to the governors, and then there's complete clarity and surety to the people?
You were not here, I guess, at the time. We said that we are looking at presenting it no later than Friday, but ultimately Monday.
Monday.
So
okay.
the possibility that it will be submitted tomorrow or Friday is what we are looking at. The earlier the better, but definitely no later than Monday.
What do you say then, or how will the process be for instance, the 5 parties that are still hoping to be registered for the snap elections with the Electoral Council to be, to be on the ballot? What do you say to those people? The process has already started. You did say that you have to look at the validity of the decree, etc.
The law does not say that a party has to wait until government announces an election to A, form a party, and B, get registered. The law is there and allows anyone to register a political party anytime. But if there is an election, then you have to be registered in time for that election. So if anybody wanted to register a party 2 days after the 2014 election, they could have done so. The Electoral Council cannot tell you, no, you cannot register a party yet because no election is being held. Similarly, there are parties that have been registered, at least one that I know of, that was registered in 2014 and did not contest the election in 2014. So there may be parties who would rush now to get registered because they would not want to miss the boat, but in the long run may say, you know what, after all, we won't contest the election. So the parties, if they register now, cannot claim, let's say, any damages because we registered because we were told there's an election. It's your right to register anytime.
On the 2 other ministers, I mean, you're holding 4 portfolios today, pretty hefty job. What is the timeline for the other 2 ministers to be put into place?
This afternoon, I'm meeting with the governor to have a discussion. The VDSM reports have been submitted. I don't know the content of them as yet. I'm having a meeting with the governor this afternoon. And then we would know whether there is reason to continue the process or that the process then stops and we look at, let's say, new candidates. I don't know what the outcome of it is going to be. Unfortunately, one of them is based on, maybe you can call it pure vindictiveness, political sabotage, accusing someone of leaking a document when it is clear that the document could have been seen and opened by so many other persons. Interestingly, it was today's Wednesday, I think it was Monday, workers came to offices, new staff, and when they put on computers, there is the document in question right before them. So while it is said that with DCOMM, you can see who all opened it or whatnot, and there's only 3 people, they're saying who opened the document at Vromi, that's one thing, but it is not only down in the department where the document can be accessed, it can be accessed in other areas as well. And the fact that if I had access to it and I open it, makes me now guilty of leaking it, no, I think so. The filing a case with the prosecutor, I can say, was malicious and was intentional to derail the formation of the government, and in so doing also tarnish the name of someone. And I think rather than the focus now being on who leaked the document, the focus should be on what's the content of the document. Was it transparent? Was it done right? Should a minister write an advice himself, sign the advice himself, take the decision all by himself without any signature of any person in authority in the ministry? Because the minister, including the prime minister, if I would want to take certain decisions, like I had to sign off today on the appointment of someone, I can't get a letter from anybody saying, I want to work at personnel affairs, I want to work at legal affairs, and I write on the letter, I've received an application from Peter, Paul, or Mary. I've reviewed their credentials and I think they're good. Decision, employ them as an advisor or as a lawyer in the legal affairs department, put them in scale 17, give them a car, give them a phone, and even give them a house allowance. This minister would then heading to jail if he would do something like that. And this is no different technically. It would appear that the advice was written by someone in the cabinet. The minister signed it and executed it without anybody else in the organization saying yes or no, good idea. Because why do you need the organization? The organization is made up of professional people who knows or supposed to know the law. They supposed to know the history of how things transpired before, or what policies in place and things like that. So a new minister might come in and say, you know what, I think we should do this. Yes, it's the minister's decision ultimately, but it's the organization's responsibility to guide that minister in the decision making and say, Minister, we have an agreement with the Dutch government for this, or we have an agreement with the French side on that, or we have a treaty that restricts us from doing, or there's a policy, or we plan to run a road through there, or we plan to build a sewage plant on that parcel of land. So if you give it to your friend to develop a supermarket or a shopping center, then we can't build a sewage plant there anymore. And while I'm talking about sewage plant, one of the meetings that I'm going to have now at 11:30, so I'm going to run out of here, is with the Ministry of Vromi to further discuss the location for the sewage plant in Cold Bay. Now, one of the controversial decisions that was taken, and Parliament instructed the government to stay away from a decision-making there. It appears that the area in the back of the former theater, Sunset Theaters in Simpson Bay, they're next to Topper's Restaurant on the main road. There's an area in the back there reserved now for years for parking for all the commercial activity that takes place there. And we have a lot of cars that every restaurant, everybody who has any activity, so you get a nice strip. We call it, the Simpson Bay Strip. But it's dangerous with cars parking right smack on the roadside, people coming in, people walking. So government has taken a decision years ago that that parcel of land will not be given out, and it is reserved for a parking lot. It is zoned, not zoned, but it's in a, how you call it, a development plan. It is taken up in that plan as parking. So to use, let's say, a popular word, but not necessarily the legal jargon, it is zoned for parking. What did the government do? The outgoing minister rushed an agreement, and apparently the advice from the department is negative. Rush a decision to enter an agreement with Port-de-Plaisance. Port-de-Plaisance owns a parcel of land next to it and gave Port-de-Plaisance the area where the parking would come now, give Port-de-Plaisance that parcel of land. So gone is the parking for the businesses, not for the businesses, but for the people who
Utilizing.
go into that area. It is dangerous, to say the least. We have had several persons who were knocked down, not critically, thank God, in most of the cases.
Right.
But it is dangerous with cars pulling in, pulling out, pulling in, pulling out. And if you want to really beautify the area and have like a nice promenade in that strip, like from Burger King right down to the bridge, and you take all the cars off the road and concentrate them in a parking garage, that's the intention, not only of this government, but previous governments as well, and go back to before 2010 even. Now, to give it away to Port-de-Plaisance, and so-called in exchange for a parcel of land over in that area for the realization of a sewage plant, and I can tell you the meeting I'm going to have now is about a possible location alternative to that in the same area where government is looking in a joint project with the French side. We would then have a joint sewage plant. What are the benefits? That the need for sewage plant for the Marigot, St. James area would be addressed, but also the need for the sewage plant for the over the hill area would also be addressed. And because it's a joint project between the French and the Dutch side, north and south, we can qualify, let's say, as well for EU funding. So in that perspective, I'm having a meeting now that's supposed to have started 4 minutes ago, and I hope they're still there. But it is also one of the critical issues or decisions that we are looking at and looking to reverse, because it is not done correctly. It is done actually illegally. Yes, the minister has the right to do so, but land that is actually zoned for the parking, so government itself, we issued a planning permit. That is what the terminology was getting at. There is a planning permit, and a planning permit